Hey guys, this is Adam from Premium Poker Tools, and in this video I want to talk about how weak suited aces hit the board. So I want to focus on these suited aces because like a6, a7, they can't make a straight using both hole cards. So these are kind of stronger hands in a lot of ways. So I'm going to focus on these, and I'm going to simulate to see how these suited aces hit the board. So first of all, I want to start off by talking about Ed Miller's got a book called The Course. That's kind of one of my favorite poker books, and he talks about how a lot of people play these sorts of hands because they want to make a big hand. So like, you might play ace 5 suited because you think to yourself, oh, I can make a sneaky 2 pair if the board is like ace 9 5 and I have ace 5. I can make a bunch of money from ace king. So, you know, people will have that sort of thought process with their weak suited aces. They'll think if the board is like king 5 5 and I have my trips, I can make a bunch of money. I can flop a sneaky straight. They won't really see the straight coming when I have a straight. When I have a flush, it'll be the nut flush. So they kind of tell themselves all these ways that I can make money from the weak suited aces. And the reality is that if you're just playing these cards in order to make a big premium hand, you probably won't be winning a lot of money. The reality is that you probably are going to have to find other ways to win the hands in order to play these hands profitably. So how else can you play these weak suited aces? I'm going to show you. So one of the things is that we flop the nut flush draw 11% of the time, so that's great. We will also flop strong straight draws a little bit. So about 11.5% of the time we're going to have, some sort of a strong draw. That's good. Also, we're going to have kind of weaker draws like a gut shot, or if we have a weak pair or a middle pair, we can turn those into like a drawing hand kind of. A lot of times you play these as if they were a drawing hand. So 33 or 34% of the time we're going to have some sort of draw that we are reasonably happy with. So again, you probably don't want to just play these draws by always check calling with them. I'm not saying you should never do that. Sometimes you'll want to do that. But the real value in these sort of draws is that you can use them to steal pots because you'll have a bunch of outs. Okay, so that's kind of an important point, that when you play these sort of hands, you should be thinking about implied odds, but you should also be thinking about ways that you can steal the pot with them. And you're going to, about 1/3 of the time, you're going to flop some sort of hand with equity that you can turn into a bluff and use to try to steal the pots that don't belong to you. So that's an important thing. So I also want to talk about how these weak suited aces differ from a hand like a suited connector. So first of all, I want to mention that when you do have a flush, you're going to have the nut flush, which is pretty important. Whereas if you had some sort of a suited connector, now when you do have a flush, you're going to have to suffer from reverse implied odds, where, if I have a flush and I have ace 5 and you have 9-8 and have a flush, stacks are going in and 9-8 is going to lose. So the suited connectors suffer from reverse implied odds, whereas the suited aces are the beneficiary. So that's a pretty important difference. Another difference is that weak suited aces do flop top pair some percentage of the time. And these aren't, the best hands in the world because we have a weak kicker. So this is probably more of like a 1 street of value hand. If we had like ace king, it's probably like a 3 street of value hand, but here we're more looking at like a 1 street of value hand. But it's still useful to have our top pair, whereas if we had 9-8 or 8-7, we would be mostly looking at middle pairs. We wouldn't have top pair this often. So that's an important difference. Another important difference is that we're going to have one overcard 80% of the time. So, one overcard is only really 3 outs, so that's not like the biggest thing in the world. but it's still useful to have an overcard. And we're going to have an overcard so frequently that it's going to be pretty useful for us to have. Whereas with a suited connector, we never really have overcards. We're more relying on our flush and straight draw outs. Okay, so one last thing is a similar point that if we're in a heads-up pot, we have the ace, so that ace kind of gives us some amount of showdown value. If you're in a multi-way pot, you're never going to win with ace high, but if you're heads up or something, having the ace will give you some nice showdown value that is, somewhat useful. It's not the most useful thing in the world, but it's somewhat useful. Whereas if you have 9-8 or 8-7 or a suited connector, you're never going to have that showdown value help you out. So that's kind of been an overview of how these weak suited aces hit the board and what you should be thinking to yourself when you have different hands. Hopefully that was useful, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time.